This is Sandy Hartnett of the Buzz Killers with Kathy Lundine's not here today. Her husband Don is doing the videoing for us. We're here with the town administrator of Pepperell, Andrew McClean. Thank you for
Thanks for
being
having
on
me.
the show.
Yeah, I'm happy to be
So
here.
would like to start with a little of your background and your education and your responsibilities.
Sure, thanks. So I am the town administrator for the town. I got here through a long career in public administration. I was in higher ed for 14 years and then jumped over to municipal government when I kind of hit the ceiling in higher ed. If you don't have a PhD, you sort of get it stuck in mid-management. And I was looking for more challenges, more things to do. Municipal government had a lot of similar responsibilities, things I was good at and interested in. And so now I've been doing that for, this is my 13th year in municipal government since jumping over from higher ed.
What was your previous town?
I was in Maynard, Mass. Most recently, and before that I was in Reading, Mass. For 7 years. 5 years in Maynard.
Maynard is a nice town. It has a nice downtown. I've been there quite a bit.
Reading's very nice too, and as is Pepperell. So, and you asked me about my role. So, town administrator. I'm the chief administrative officer of the town, which is, I'm responsible for the day-to-day management of what goes on in the community, and all the employees report up through their supervisors and the department heads to me. My bosses are the Board of Selectmen and the town meeting. But that day-to-day operation, the Board of Selectmen meet every 2 weeks. They can't be involved, shouldn't be involved in every little detail of things that happen. We've got all sorts of things that have to be dealt with faster than every 2 weeks, and that's what I have to spearhead.
Okay, all right. And then we'd like you to review the budget a little bit, the budget situation, the override, the cuts that may happen if we don't have an override. You don't have to go into too much detail, but just to review.
Sure. In order to do this without going into detail, I will have to tell everyone, go to the town website. There's an FY 2020 budget link. There's a lot of documents there. There'll be more documents. We'll be updating those documents because the numbers change. We find savings, whatever, we resubmit documents. But in the meantime, what we have is a town budget that I was presented with in November, a revenue planner. And that revenue plan had $600,000 of savings account money, what we call free cash, in the budget just to balance it. It also had some very conservative expectations on how much things would cost. For instance, the schools would come in at 3%, and the town budget would only grow at 1%. So conservative growth and still dipping into the savings account to balance the budget. This was back in November, my first day on the job. Well, of course, health insurance and education costs and even town costs exceeded those conservative estimates. And so now we're facing quite a deficit heading into fiscal 2020. We need about $900,000 more money to pay the bills of this town to maintain level services. With contractual increases for some staff and some services we buy, but not to grow, not to do more. In addition to that, it is not a good practice to use that money from the savings account. So given our dilemma with the budget, I have worked with the FinCom, worked with the Board of Selectmen, worked with all the department heads, and we're trying to cut wherever we can without, you can't cut without an impact, but cutting where we think we can somehow withstand the impact. And nobody's happy. We're looking at 8 layoffs. It could even be worse than that. We're still looking at numbers. The schools have been very cooperative since we let them know how serious things were. They have come back with $485,000 in reductions.
Wow.
But they're an $18 million enterprise between the two schools.
It was $200,000 last time.
They brought in another 200 something.
That's good.
So, but it's still not as much as we had hoped, or what we need. So we've asked the town for a tax override of $1.46 million. And the purpose of that would be to restore the cuts, which, by the way, are all on the town side. These school reductions are helping our budget, but they don't help on the cuts because the cuts are town cuts. And then the other portion of that money we're asking for in the tax override gets us off of the savings account use. We don't have any more money in the savings account.
Free cash.
The free cash, right? So we could use that money this year, but it won't be there next year, and that hole isn't going to go away.
No.
In addition to that, we've got a snow and ice deficit for this year. We've got legal bills for some of the things going on in town. What little is left in the savings account after we spend this money will be nearly gone completely. And then we enter next year in just an even deeper hole. So this tax override is a request for sort of sanity. Right size the budget by getting us off the free cash and restore the services that the town is used to. Again, not looking for expansion, looking to be steady as she goes.
Okay.
So those
How
are the two
how
things.
can the town get some kind of equilibrium between, taxing people out of town and not cutting everything to try to become prosperous? Like the FinCom member always says, you can't cut your way to prosperity.
Can't cut your way.
So how do you keep in the middle there?
So there's a few things. One is, we want to foster economic development, but those things take time. We can do things today and start getting a little bit of tax money tomorrow. But let's imagine that we were going to build, 100 houses, and that would generate approximately $500,000 in tax revenue. Well, last year we built 16 or 17 houses in town. So that, on that path, that's a 5 or 6 year plan. And I'm not suggesting we should build 100 houses, but just saying that is, if that's part of the solution. Commercial development the same way. It doesn't happen overnight. There's things we can do to foster it with our zoning, with doing business development, outreach, encouraging businesses to come into this town. But if we hit all our marks with that, it's still a long-term growth strategy. So I'm not saying we shouldn't be doing it. We are doing it. We will do it. We need $1.5 million now. And hopefully we'll grow into those things so that we don't have to come back and ask for more money 10 years from now. We'll have grown into our prosperity. So it is a lot to ask of the taxpayers, but I again refer you to our website.
Right.
There is a chart there that shows how we are taxed compared to 10 of our peers. And we are not only the 10th of these 11 towns, but if we get the tax increase we've asked for, we will still be the 10th of 11th. We are not asking for an extravagant budget. We are already a very modestly funded town. We're asking for just a little bit less modesty.
And will people feel those cuts? Are they going to feel
Absolutely.
it? They'll feel it. They'll feel it in the services, in the...
Absolutely. The cuts right now are sort of broad-based. Every department in town, town hall is calling it sort of one department because each department in town hall only has one employee. So it's tough to cut a whole department. But within the town hall, there are 3 cuts. Police, fire, DPW, library, and council on aging. So the cuts right now are broad-based. You will feel them. The library is going to reduce hours. The cuts at the COA will be felt by the clients they serve. Police and fire it's more dramatic with them. For instance, with the fire service, they have 5 full-time employees. We're scheduled to cut one of them. It's 20% of their staffing. It will change the way they provide services. It may impact their response times.
Would that have any effect on someone's homeowner's insurance when the fire department in your town makes cuts? Does that have any direct correlation?
It can. There's a number of factors that go into that. If we didn't have a fire department, if we didn't have an ambulance service.
I didn't know. I just thought of that.
Sure. No, it is a real thing. It's more on the commercial property where it is impactful than it is on residential. But insurance companies do look at our record in the fire service and response times. And if we have fewer people, we may not be able to get calls as directly or as quickly. It can impact those things. I wouldn't say it would be dramatic, but it's certainly something to consider.
All right, okay. Anything else you think you should say on the budget, or we good?
I could talk all day about it, but I think what the town needs to really look at is how serious this is. I've heard from a number of people, oh, we've heard this before and the town's always gotten by. Well, one of the reasons this problem is so big right now is because we've been squeezing this sponge for a long time. There's not much left there.
Is the sponge the free cash?
Or even just budgets that were reasonably funded in the past, and now they're just really, really bare bones. And it's okay to be bare bones, but we also get people coming into my office literally every week. A man was here on Monday, saying we just need $20,000 for this one service, and I said to him, I want to say yes. Yeah. It's a absolutely legitimate thing. Yeah. But there's a line of people outside the door, and at the end of that line is like $1 million of requests, and they're all $20,000, and they're all really important. And I absolutely believe that. I don't want to lay off employees. No. I want to do more for this town. I have a real positive outlook. I think this town has a lot that it can accomplish, but it needs to invest in itself. It can't get there by cutting. Yeah. You know, when the economy's bad, a Keynesian economic philosophy is put some money in and get things going again. Yeah. And that's kind of where we're at. A little bit of tax money from each person can go an awful long way in the community. It would. All right. And I want to assure the public we're spending our money wisely.
Okay. Good. So we'll go into the assessing situation. On social media,
we're spending their money wisely.
Yes. Okay. On social media, there are a few comments of, is the town being properly assessed? People's property and their buildings and their homes.
Sure.
Is the assessment appropriate and being done correctly?
So there's a couple of factors here. There's 4,500 parcels in this town, and we have one assessor. I think she does a terrific job. But undoubtedly, somebody's assessment isn't correlated. We don't assess all 4,500 properties literally every year. There's a lot of sort of formulaic things with similar properties. We've assessed one, we're going to apply the similar formula to the others, and most of the time we get it right. But the whole system is designed for that fallibility, and that's why we have an abatement process. Okay. So if someone really feels that their assessment is wrong, and they may just not know, they may feel like their property is worth less than we feel it's worth, but when we review their assessment, we may say, no, it's spot on. But they absolutely should contact the assessor and say, please look at my assessment, I think it's off. Okay. There are things, people tear buildings down or build buildings up, things change, and they may say, my neighbor's got a different assessment than me. Well, we may not have acknowledged that they built a building. We may not know that they did it. They may have done it without permits. So there's all sorts of things, and the best thing for folks to do is to call us and let us get into their property and give them a full assessment. And you asked if our assessments are done right. One other factor here is we have a budget and we have total property value, and when you divide the two things together, you get your tax bill. And but if we change your assessment, if your assessments grow by 10% townwide, your tax bill is going to be the same. Your tax rate's going to go down, right? Because we're not changing the size of the budget because we changed your assessment. So, but your assessment could be off compared to the whole community's.
So is the commercial rate and the residential rate, tax rate, are the same?
They are, except that there's some other factors. On the residential side, there's a small amount of personal property tax. Maybe somebody has a boat in their yard or something, we tax that. But on the commercial side, there's a lot of personal property tax assessments. So the value of all the equipment in a business can be taxed.
Factored into it.
That's right. Where on the residential side, it's a different equation. But the tax rate is not split in this community.
And the other question I was interested in was the grants. We hear a lot of talk about the grants. We had a grant for this. We had a grant for that. How much in dollars do we actually get from grants? And do they go directly into the budget, or they're specifically for something?
Yeah, it's a mixed bag. I don't have a good answer for you for how
Okay.
much do we get.
Okay.
I'm going to have to go kind of
That's
look
all right.
that up. A lot of the grants we get are quite small,
Mhm.
but they add up a few $1,000 here and there. Some of them we get every year. They're called formula grants. So, for instance, we get $12 for every senior in town, and that money goes right to the Council on Aging for their
Okay.
programs.
How old is the senior?
Excuse me.
60 or 55?
60 and above,
60?
and the state measures it based on the biennial census, so the 2010 census.
Okay.
So we know that our senior population has grown in the past 9 years, but we won't get a new census for another year,
Okay.
probably 2021, 2022, before we see the
And they
official
give the
numbers.
town $12.
But the state provides us with $12 per senior right now. It's a smitten, a little
Yeah.
tiny bit of money
Yeah.
when you consider how much we get to educate our children.
Yeah, that's
But
funny.
it's an amazing amount of money for the Council on Aging
Yeah.
to
to have. Yeah,
absolutely.
use, yeah.
They're not trying to bus the kids to school and build these huge buildings, right?
right.
They don't need as much money as a
No,
school.
no,
It goes a
okay.
long way. But so we get these grants. You asked if they get added to the budget. So in most cases, the grant is supplemental.
Okay.
We're able to do something that we couldn't do before. And like some of the programming for the COA, we just couldn't afford to do without that money.
Does
So-
one person write them, or each department finds them and writes them?
Yeah, it's everybody for themselves
They
in
find
most
their own.
cases.
Okay.
There's a lot of sharing. I've written a number of grants, and I can help somebody because I've
Okay.
done it before, kind of
Yeah.
thing. Or we've got a boilerplate of this is who we are, because a lot of grants are looking for background.
Yeah.
So a lot of that gets shared.
Yeah.
But typically, your department has an opportunity, and you're going to wind up writing it.
Okay.
But the other thing is that a lot of times it means that we don't have to spend money out of the budget. So particularly like infrastructure grants, we want to pave some sidewalks, and it's a lot of money, and we'll put it on the capital plan.
Okay.
Well, there's a complete streets program with the state of Massachusetts, and if we get awarded that money, it will help us pave some of those sidewalks, and now we don't have to spend it in the. So it's not really in the budget, but it's taking the
helps,
place of
definitely
something that
helps,
we
yeah.
were hoping to pay for anyway. So now that money could be available for something else.
Alright. And now I want you to talk a little bit about the master plan. The last master plan, I think, was 2006. That came out? Is that what am I
That
calling
sounds
it right? The
correct.
master plan.
Yeah, so a master plan is required by the state that every town has one, but then the rules about how often we update it and what we do with it are kind of loose. A good practice is about every 10 or 15 years you update your plan. And what it is supposed to be is sort of an assessment of your community culture and what you would like to become in, say, the next decade or two, right?
Big
Because all this
picture.
planning is long term. And usually it has sort of an economic development focus, but it can also be a primary thing on residential growth. You know, there's all sorts of factors that a community might say, this is what we want to do. Let's say we didn't have water and sewer, but we wanted to. That might be something in the master plan. Next 10 years, we want to build that out.
All right.
Right? And every community's got its own needs, so they're not identical cookie cutter.
Okay.
But they all have similar components.
Do you know of anything that's coming out of the master plan they're working on at this date?
So right now there's a lot of drafts. They're doing a culture and recreation component right now. We just got awarded extra money to do a housing production plan, which is really to help us with how we want to integrate our future housing.
Okay.
So what type of housing do we need, and what parts of town do we need it in, and foster that with local developers.
Is that a cost? Do we have to pay to have
That one
master
we're not
plan?
paying for.
But
So
the whole master plan, is that cost something?
there are costs to it. NMCOG, which is our regional planning agency, because a lot of this planning stuff gets done regionally because things don't stop at the border, right? So all over the state there are these regional planning agencies that are sponsored by the state to help us integrate, with what's happening regionally. Highway development, what happens with our rivers and streams, wildlife management. There's all sorts of regional things that we all have to think about. But so they're helping us with that master planning, and they also help pay for it.
Okay.
So-
And do we have a town planner, or we don't have a town planner?
We currently have a contracted planner.
Contracted,
So it's a woman who's been in the profession her whole career, and she works for us about 10 hours a week.
Okay.
Prior to her, we had a full-time planner, And prior to that, we did not have a planner.
Mm-hmm.
And the planner's role is to take a document like the master plan and implement it over the next, say, 10 years to work with the goals and implementation strategies and find ways to get us there, as well as working with local developers and even just residential folks, commercial, so that their plans for development meet the community requirements.
Sounds good. Let's see what else do I want to ask you. Oh, so let's talk about the marijuana situation. I'll call it a situation. Where in the town could it be if someone came in and wanted to open a business?
Yeah, right now.
Where would it be?
Yeah, right now it is nowhere and everywhere. And our planning board is racing to town meeting next month or in May to establish zoning to control that conundrum. So the state law says if you don't have zoning after a certain date, which has gone by, a retail establishment could be put in anywhere. And most towns
anywhere, even residential.
Anywhere. So it was a piece of the state to say, get your zoning in place.
Yeah.
And
we didn't.
And we haven't. We're almost there.
So it will still be effective, even though we're late.
There's no active applications to try to open one up, so we're not in any short-term danger. But we do need to get our zoning in place. But because it's not zoned anywhere, so I said nowhere.
Yeah.
But so because of the state law that says if you don't put zoning in place, they're free to do what they want.
Even near a school or anything.
There's a few little boundaries that the state imposed, but pretty much we lose control if we don't do our job. And so we're doing our job. And it'll be ready for May town meeting. It is restricting it to commercial and industrial areas and with a lot of oversight from the planning board. And that's for retail. There's also a movement to encourage cultivation, and whether or not the planning board adopts that, it remains to be seen.
And cultivation, you said, is not agriculture, it's industrial.
Cultivation in Massachusetts is considered a commercial industrial enterprise.
So it would have to be in the industrial section.
It has to be indoors.
Indoors.
Which is another component of this, the security issues that they're concerned about. So you would have to have or build greenhouses, and that increases energy consumption, and there's a whole bunch of farmers in the world that think, this is kind of silly, but it's the way the law has been implemented at this point.
How much money could it bring into a town? I mean, what is the tax on it?
So on the retail, we can tax it at 3% of sales,
3%
gross
that
sales.
The town gets to keep.
We would keep it. The state's also got taxes in there. And then we can also negotiate host community agreements that can last up to 5 years. In fact, we're required to have one, but the details are negotiable. But in those host community agreements, you can ask for additional money because of specific impacts you anticipate. So the sales tax is more like what we get from restaurants and alcohol sales and so on. This is more because you're here, all these other things occurred and we want you to offset that impact. Maybe there's additional drug abuse issues in town and we've incurred some costs with that. That's a very controversial situation right now statewide because the early adopting towns got big host community agreement payments, and now as it's maturing a little bit, companies are pushing back saying the impacts aren't going to be that great. We don't want to have to pay you that much.
Were they giving them tax breaks, or what were they? What kind of?
They're basically giving them more money. They're saying we'll give you $100,000 a year if you say yes.
Would Pepperell do anything like that?
The community, the retailers are giving the town the money.
Oh, giving the money to let them settle. Settle in
and then it's a 5-year. It goes away. And then 5 years from now, we'll know if those impacts are real. This is the wisdom of the host community agreement was to say, we don't know what the impacts are going to be, so we're going to sunset it. If they're real, you'll be able to extend it. If they're not real, stop taking people's money.
Do you have any idea what kind of impact it'll have on this town?
It would depend on the location, but you could certainly guess that there'd be traffic impacts. You would expect to see, an increased volume of people that aren't necessarily from this town. And when outsiders come in, you may see ancillary problems. The police would tell you that they would expect to see car breaks, house breaks, and so on increase. They don't necessarily have evidence of that because we don't have one, right? But it's certainly a likely concern, something
yeah.
to absolutely be concerned about.
Right.
And those are the types of things that we'd like to be able to combat if one came here.
Okay, good. All right, and let's talk about the Peter Fitzpatrick School. Now, do you think that's sellable, leasable, or should we demolish it?
Okay, well, two different questions.
Yeah.
It is absolutely sellable.
It is, okay.
I don't think we should.
Okay.
It's a 19-acre piece of land in the center of our town. I was at the library last night talking about this very topic. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity. Okay, we could sell it, and 10 years from now, we might be really unhappy. Yeah. And so we need to be very careful with what we do with it. Okay. And if that takes us another year to figure out, and we have some operating costs on that property right now, that basically a sunk cost. But if we get it right, we'll never regret that sunk cost. Okay. If we get it wrong, we're going to be all complaining that, oh, we sold it to the highest bidder and we got stuck with an eyesore or whatever gets put there, right? But it's in a beautiful location, center of town, up on a little hill.
Yeah, it is.
So much possibility. Let's take our time and get to the right solution.
Okay. And what is it costing the town in each budget?
So we are currently budgeted for, we have about $75,000 in this year's budget. Okay. Some of it was appropriated at town meeting in October. We took control of the property in November. We have asked for $127,000 in next year's budget to operate the property. We still don't know what our real costs are. We've had a mild winter. We've actually shut the heat off in the building. We had it on in the worst of the winter, but at this point, it's March and oftentimes the heat's still on. It's not right now. So we've sort of managed this in a very cost-effective way. Excuse me. If we have a harsher winter next year, or if the building is occupied next year, those costs are going to be higher. I think the 127 is going to be enough.
That's enough.
And there is some short-term opportunities to rent or lease out the space or generate some revenue while we make the bigger picture decision to offset some of those costs.
And when is the final committee?
The
when will they be finished with their report?
They've asked to present at town meeting. I would like to see something before then. It may be informal, and then maybe the town meeting's the formal presentation. But we've already seen sort of anecdotally what they're proposing, which is mostly community focused and commercial things that are also community focused, nonprofit type things.
Okay, and who would have the final say on it?
Ultimately, it's the Board of Selectmen. If we were going to sell the property, that's a town meeting vote. Okay. But in terms of next step usage, I can authorize things, but I wouldn't do it without buy-in from the board.
Okay. They would take a vote on it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely would insist on that. And there's all sorts of legal contracts that would have to be written if we rented it or whatever. So it would, short or long term, the town would be protected from whatever happens there next.
Okay. How about a little update on the Nashua Road toxic soil project? Anything new?
Nothing tremendous.
Any word when the zoning board of appeals decision will come down from the courts there, Pepperell versus Pepperell?
That's about as much as I can tell you is what's happening. Yes. So the proponent has given us a new proposal about a week ago.
The Terra lawyers there.
The Terra Environmental MCGI is the name of the company, right? It is mostly the same package. Okay. It's scaled down a little bit. It's responded to some of the things that Mass DEP.
The height of the hill and the
height's smaller. The total volume is less. And it answers some of Mass DEP's concerns. Okay. However, the town's still completely opposed to it. They're not opposed to the scale and the scope. They're opposed to the project. Right. And then the land court question is April 4th is our first meeting with the judge. Okay. It's a pre-trial, or not a trial. It's a pre-conference hearing or pre-conference meeting. And the parties come in and the judge kind of sets up sort of the boundaries. Okay. Says, this is what we're going to talk about. These are the things you have to bring me. And at that point, we'll know sort of whether we're looking at, a relatively quick thing or something that's going to be very lengthy. Okay. We'll at least have our first look at it, but that'll be next week.
Right. And let's just say the project has the go-ahead and Mr. Burton starts doing it. Would you be open to talking to him and asking him for some kind of compensation for the town, or some, maybe even, I read where they have to have a full-time site inspector
Sure.
when the trucks start coming in,
Sure.
which the town has to pay for.
So, well, no,
they don't.
no, we wouldn't pay for it.
Okay.
So
good.
if the town were in favor of the project,
Mhm.
we would set up all sorts of conditions in order to get to yes, and it would include things like that. There's
Mhm.
going to be this much monitoring, this frequently,
Mhm.
you know, who's going to pay for it, all those kind
Yeah.
of things. All that stuff is still to be negotiated
Okay.
if we were willing to say yes. We're not interested in saying yes.
But say he had the go ahead.
Well, even if the land court says we're upholding the ZBA decision,
Okay.
he still has many hurdles to go through before he gets to do what he thinks he can do as of right.
Mm.
It's one less hurdle
Hmm.
if the land court, but the land court isn't the final
No. But
barrier.
at some
to
point,
him.
we're going to have a yes or no.
At some point, he could choose to do this without
Yeah.
our permission. There's a certain as of right component to what he can do.
But then he's
But then he will be,
responsible for
he's responsible for things, and there'll be all sorts of
liability
lawsuits and stuff
everything.
as a result
Yeah.
of that.
Which I don't.
It's at his risk,
Mm.
and what we would like to do is convey to the company that there's also an awful lot of things that could go on that property that we would be very happy to have there.
Mhm.
That requires us all to get to the table and chat,
Mhm.
which it hasn't happened because we're
Yeah.
sort of at loggerheads
Right.
over the
Right.
current proposal.
Would that happen with the judge when you go to court at the land court, or not?
It's absolutely part of what the judge might ask.
Oh, okay.
So what have you guys done to
Mm.
sort of work this out?
Yeah.
Right? And there could be conversations about that. Mr. Burton, in fact, was in my office about a week ago
Oh, cool.
when he dropped off the package.
Great.
And I asked him that question, would
Cool.
there be interest in alternatives to that site? And he said he would listen.
Good.
But he wasn't, he has partners, and, he wasn't,
Yeah.
I wasn't negotiating with him.
No.
It was just sort of a, and this is the first time I'd ever met him.
Oh,
And
okay.
he happened to come in, and I asked him the question,
Good.
but I think the town needs to do that. The town needs to say, what do we want there,
Mhm.
as opposed to what do we not want there.
And that's commercial zoning,
It's industrial.
industrial, okay. All right, that sounds good. And then, just give us a little update on the fire department. Have you found a chief, or is that an ongoing?
We have
Process?
a chief.
Well, he's leaving, right, Toby,
he is.
right,
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely, yeah. We know where he is.
Yeah,
We found him. We are actively searching. We
Okay.
have, off the top of my head, we have 8 or 10 resumes already
Oh, good.
in the house. It closes in about a week, so there's
Okay.
resumes keep coming in each day.
Are some of them Pepperell?
There are some
resumes?
internal
Okay,
people.
good.
Yep. And so after the resume period ends, we're going to be convening a committee. We've already selected some of the people. I'm notifying them, asking them for their availability. We'll set up a schedule.
Okay.
We hope to interview during April. There'll be 2 rounds of interviews, and then there's a Board of Selectmen interview process because they're the appointing authority.
Okay.
The employees report to me on a day-to-day basis,
Mhm.
but myself and the 2 public safety chiefs are hired by the selectmen, appointed by the selectmen.
Yeah.
So they'll have the final say. Our current chief is leaving the end of May.
Mhm.
We would like to make an offer in advance of that so that we can have a little bit of transition time. We're on track for that.
Okay, good. Right, well, that's very good. I'd just like to have a little timeline of what will happen at town meeting. Give it we're not voting on the override at town meeting.
You are,
We are. It will.
sort of.
Is it a stand-up vote, or is it a ballot vote, or?
That's up to the town meeting.
Oh, okay.
So I'll take you through it quickly. So
Yeah.
there's actually 2 votes.
Okay.
There is the town meeting vote. There's another one as well.
Okay.
So town meeting is May 6th,
Mhm.
Monday night, 7:30 p.m. Nissitissit Middle School. Don't be late.
Yeah.
There's about 21 articles on the warrant.
Okay.
We're figuring out what order to put them in, and there's
Okay.
a little other stuff we do at that meeting. But the budget will be obviously a big part of it. The marijuana bylaw will be there.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
The town will vote a budget, and then we are asking them to vote a supplemental budget.
Mhm.
So the budget that they'll be voting is the one that
It's the balance.
we don't
budget.
want.
Right. Yeah.
It's a lot of cuts. It's not a good budget. puts us in a bad place next year too. It's not a good thing. The supplemental budget puts us closer to where we'd like to be. It fixes all those problems and sort of stabilizes us.
Okay.
You know, I'd love to ask for even more money, but this is asking for what we really need, a minimum. So those will be 2 votes we'll ask the town meeting to make.
Okay.
In order to get the supplemental budget, we need a tax override. And that has to happen at the ballot.
Okay.
So that's been scheduled for May 13th, 1 week later.
1 week later.
There'll be an election, a local election on May 13th at the Varnum Brook School. At that location, they'll have one question to answer. It'll be the question of the tax override. It'll be laid out. You know, the information about what they're getting for their money will be all explained. It's a yes or a no.
Okay.
And we need 50% plus 1 of the voters to say, we want this budget. We want to restore these things. We want to have a good fiscal, healthy community.
Okay. But if the balanced budget passes at town meeting, you don't need an override. If the budget we don't want, with all the cuts and everything, passes, so that negates the override.
It does not.
It does not.
So that is the budget
Okay.
that we carry with us to July 1st and start fiscal 20 with.
All right.
What we're asking for is a second budget,
Okay.
the supplemental one.
All right.
That restores the cuts, gets us off of the free cash. That one can't be paid for with the current taxation thing.
Okay.
Thus, we need the tax override.
I think that was
And it's very confusing,
Yeah.
even to me. I mean, I've heard these things in my career, but I'm actually doing it,
right.
you know, and it's
trying to explain it to people.
exactly.
Yeah.
Something the citizens should know. Your taxes are going to go up with or without the override. Every year, things march forward a little bit.
Because of 2.5.
Prop 2.5, and because we're paying for things that go up in value and cost. Your taxes right now are estimated to go up about $160, $170 as an average.
Anyway.
With the tax override, they'll go up about $350. Okay, so it goes up a little bit, and we lay people off, and we have all these problems moving forward. Or they go up a bit more, and we have some stability.
Yeah.
That's what we're asking for.
Stability. Good. All right. Anything else you'd like to say?
Thank you for having me. This has been really
thank
nice.
you. Thank you. Taking the time out.
Cameraman, great job.
Busy.
Huh?
Yeah.